This time on Jeep Talk, we're road tripping, and you're with us again here in the 2018 Petaluma MVCC Spring Meet.
We did this last year, didn't we?
We did indeed.
Well, we're doing it again. But this time, we want to keep it more Jeep because we know that's what you folks want.
That's right, and we're going to talk to some Jeep people.
Some who?
Jeep people. There's one now.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I think he is a Jeep people.
I think he is.
You have anything to say, Mr. Jeep people?
Well, this beats walking.
I hear that.
He makes a good point.
So stay tuned, folks, and enjoy the show.
This is Jeep Talk.
Well, this looks like a fine example, and you are Mr. Nick Bombini.
I am. How are you doing, Damon?
Great. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Glad you could make it out to this fine event.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been relaxing and good time out here.
Great. So what do you got for us here?
It's a 1945 Ford GPW. I restored it with my father. Finished it a couple years ago.
Well, it looks really nice. You do pretty good work, and it's a fine addition to our little group here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You say 45?
45.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a real late one, July 6th of 45, so it's got all the super late features that most of the Jeeps don't have. Yeah, it's fun finally getting done after 13 years.
Mm-hmm. And now you work on other stuff as well, right?
I do. I've got a 1943 GMC CCKW and multiple trailers. Right now I'm working on a 1940 Ben-Hur trailer for the truck.
Oh, okay. Well, then we will see him at the next meet, I hope, or something like that.
Absolutely. That's the plan, to start bringing everything back out at the next meet.
Well, that's great. Thank you for coming out.
Thanks, Damon. Good to see you.
Same here. Well, I'm sitting in yet another Jeep. This one's a little different, and it's owned by Mr. Jack Valente, who's sitting right next to me. Hi, Jack.
How are you?
I'm doing good. Tell us about your Jeep.
Jeep was built delivered October 1942 out of Richmond, California. I don't believe that it ever saw service outside the United States because they never brought things back if they did. It was in the process of being converted to an LRD Jeep when I bought it in 2004.
Explain what an LRD Jeep is.
Okay, well, when the British were fighting Rommel in North Africa and the Italians in North Africa, there was a unit called the Long Range Desert Group, and they did reconnaissance behind the lines, and they used these big Chevy trucks on the side, and as a command car they would use, actually they used 3/4-ton Chevys until they were able to get their hands on some Jeeps. And the U.S. government lend-lease a number of Jeeps to the British, and some of them ended up behind the lines with the LRDG and the SAS. The LRDG did have weapons, and the difference between, if you notice, a LRDG Jeep and an SAS, the SAS had their gas cans on the hood, where the LRDG, as it was a command vehicle, they would have the big Chevy trucks hauling their extra fuel for them. And it did have some extra cans, but only if needed in an emergency.
Okay, and I see we got some firepower going here.
Yeah.
What exactly are these?
We have twin Vickers Ks. They started out, when the unit first started out, they started out with Lewis guns, but the Lewis gun had an exposed undercarriage or open drum magazine, and that was prone to jam with the dirt and the elements. So they liked the Vickers K because it was a sealed drum. They would have had a couple of cans right here, and they could quick load them. The Vickers K was 1,200 rounds a minute. The the guns were not synchronized, so you could independently fire each one.
See.
But you would probably not hold your finger down because a 100-round magazine would be gone in very short order.
Yeah, I imagine because you're out in the middle of nowhere, you have to conserve what you brought with you.
Right.
Well, it's very nice. I know you've had it for some years. I've seen it at the meets. And
you want to talk about that?
Okay. So what do we have here?
Well, actually, what we have here is a sun compass. Now, there is a needle that goes in the sun compass. I don't put it in because I'm afraid somebody's going to hurt themselves by. But the sun compass was used for navigation since there were not a lot of good quality maps in that period of time. The sun compass was used like a sundial, and they would have the navigator sitting in your seat, the driver, and they would use time, distance, and speed, and the navigator's making all these notes while they're going, and every 15 minutes with the needle they would adjust the sundial type, and it would rotate around. And leaving from a certain point, they knew where they were leaving from, and they would go cross country. And at the end of the day, the navigator would have to compute where they were. And they used celestial navigations. The radio truck would get a tone from Greenwich Mean Time with that information, and the albums that they used had logarithms and the areas that they would be in. Then they could compute where they were on the world. They didn't have GPS at that time.
Of course.
Yeah. And sometimes it was very accurate. If the navigator was worth his salt, he could be within maybe a mile or two off from their celestial navigation point.
So they didn't use magnetic compasses?
They did not use magnetic compasses because of all the steel on the vehicles would give you as much as an 8-degree error.
Yeah.
Now they did use on occasion a boat compass. The boat compass would have been on that side, I believe.
Okay.
And since boat compass is on a big battleship or something like that, it's not affected by the magnetic.
Right.
But they didn't use it very often. They stuck with the Bagnall sun compass.
It's very interesting. Well, it truly is a unique Jeep. It's not the only one that's been done up this way or similar. We have another member who has one. We hope to interview him before we leave, and he'll talk about his version and what he did to it.
Right, I believe his is SAS.
Yes. So it's a nice addition to all the Army ones that we see running around here, and we're really happy that you have it.
Great, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Jack.
All right.
So, here with John Neuenberg, and going to take a look at your Jeep. What do you got going on here, John?
Well, this is a 1942 Ford, March of 42, built in Richmond, California, and it's set up as it's a replica Special Air Service gun Jeep that the British Army used in North Africa, in the North African War in 41 and through the early 43.
Okay.
And the Special Air Service was a creation of a British lieutenant, of all things, who sold the top management into the idea of a small group of people, highly trained, getting behind the German and Italian lines in Libya and raiding airfields.
Okay.
So
sort of the start of the Special Forces then.
Yeah, it was really the first combat Special Forces unit.
Okay.
And the SAS today is Britain's premier, Special Forces unit, kind of similar to the SEALs.
Gotcha. Okay.
And in World War II, they were a raiding unit, and they set up Jeeps for long distance desert travel. They would take trips. The lines were sort of on the Egypt-Libyan border, back and forth through Libya. It depends on what side it was winning at the time. But they would leave Cairo, go upriver, up the Nile, and then go around this valley that was pretty much hard to cross, and go way south and get around the lines to do their thing. and they had pre-positioned places for equipment and fuel and all that. But they were very Jeep oriented when the American Jeep started to come into the British Army through the Lend-Lease program. That was in June '42. They used Jeeps as their transport. They had some 3-ton Chevrolets as well, big trucks, but mostly they would do these long-range trips, hundreds of miles with lots of fuel. So there are 15 jerry cans, gas cans on this Jeep. Some would be for water, some mostly for fuel.
Okay.
And lots of armament. So they mounted Vickers K machine guns typically, which was an obsolete aircraft gun at the time, and it was available in the Middle East because it was obsolete. So the SAS liked a lot of firepower. Originally they were a sabotage unit that didn't use vehicles at all. They were taken in to and from by a reconnaissance unit, and they would walk in and put time bombs on airplanes at night and then sneak away. Like 4 men raids. They could destroy 20, 25 planes.
Wow.
But they decided they needed their own transport, so the Jeeps in June of '42 became the chosen vehicle for them.
Now, was your Jeep always like this, or did you build it this way?
It was set up like a kind of a typical American Jeep when I got it.
Okay.
And used it a number of years here in California, and I've always wanted to build a Jeep like this. It's very uncommon in the U.S., mostly because of the guns.
Yeah.
They're replica guns, of course, but very few people build them. So, and they're relatively expensive. You know, so, and the SAS used 3 to 5 machine guns on each Jeep.
Wow. Okay.
Typically.
Well, someone told me that your Jeep is a Ford, but it has a Willys frame.
Right. It's a March '42 Ford, so that's the first 3 months into the Ford production, and the Ford frame plant wasn't producing frames. Okay. At that time, and so they bought frames from the vendor that sold them to Willys.
Oh, all right.
So it would have the recognition would be this round cross tube here. That's the easiest way to recognize a Willys style frame.
Right.
And Ford frames being more of a flat, square tube.
Right.
Flat-sided. So when somebody comes upon an early Ford, they'll see, if they know a little but not a lot, they'll see this tube, this round tube here, through the grill, and they'll think it's Willys.
Oh, okay.
But it's not necessarily true.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, there's other recognition features for Fords and Willys. But I think the SAS used actually Willys initially. Okay. Because they mentioned that in books.
Oh, all right.
But the British did have Ford had contracts with the Brits, and they made Jeeps for Great Britain, Russia, and China.
Awesome.
During World War II, as well as, of course, the U.S.
Well, John, you got a really cool Jeep, and it's unique in its own right, so, you should be proud of that. Very cool.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks for taking time.
You bet.
So if you guys remember last time, we had a visit with some guys that were putting a Jeep together at the show last year, and this is it. It's Ginger, and she's here, and we're going to talk to our mechanics, and maybe not to our owner because he doesn't want to talk to us, but so we're here with Don anyway, and Don, tell us a little, where are you from, and give us the...
So I'm from Boise, Idaho,
okay.
And Chris here is local in the area. He's down in Chowchilla. The area you're in here is our camp. We call it the Swamp. We're a bunch of people that get together just at this time of the year from all over the West here. And we took on this project to... Chris came up with the idea is to build a Jeep in 3 days. And so we did a lot of prep work. People worked on the sheet metal. We had the axles rebuilt and that. But basically when we started last year, as you saw on the film from last year, we started with a bare frame. And we ended up assembling the entire Jeep right in this campsite we're standing in right now. And at the end of 3 days, at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, it was ready to drive off.
So what really happened?
That's what really happened. Well, we forgot a box of bolts. That's the most exciting thing along the way. So we had a couple of boxes of bolts and crates and crates of parts that we'd had to put on the Jeep. And while we kept falling over this one extra box in the garage in the shop, none of us actually put it into the back of one of the trucks. Oh, so it's one of those, I thought you got that. No, I thought you got that. And so at the very about halfway through, we realized we were out of certain types of bolts and we couldn't find any new ones or painted ones. And we ended up having to scrounge through this old root beer crate of soda bottles that was about a foot thick of used bolts and nuts in it. And so we dug through that for the next day and a half and found enough parts to finish off the Jeep.
So how much work after you left here did you still have left to do?
Basically a lot of touch-up, and then we made sure that we had all of the bolts. We had to leave a lot of bolts out in some places, like the light bracket had 1 bolt instead of 3, and so we had to go back through it and add all the bolts we had missed and make sure they were painted and that, and then tune the thing up. But when we left last year, there was 0 miles on the odometer. And from when we arrived back here, there were only 6.5 miles.
Oh, wow.
And so we've actually...
So you're driving the wheels off this thing.
Oh, yeah.
We put 19 miles on since we've been on site at the camp, just driving around. This year's the year of enjoying the Jeep.
Oh, okay, good.
Because last year, Chris and I and my son Ken, basically I left the camp once. And Chris was off twice to hunt around for parts in the camp. But other than that, from sunrise to sunset, we lived in this campsite.
You guys know you're supposed to be on vacation, right?
Well, it was.
This was vacation. Okay.
How many times and places in the world do you get to build a Jeep in 3 days in front of an audience?
Well, that's true.
That is very critical of everything you're doing, and it has lots of advice for you.
All right. Well, guys, you've done a great job. I'm glad to see it here again, and I'm sure, Chris, you're excited to drive it around some more.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks for having us on the show.
Thanks. Guys.
Thanks.
Bye. I am standing next to another Jeep, and this one belongs to George Cooper. Nice to meet you, and
likewise.
Say hi to you again, George.
Thank you, yep.
So, tell me about your Jeep and a little bit about yourself.
Well, the Jeep is a 1944 Ford. Probably came from the Richmond area. That's what our guess is. I acquired it more than 10 years ago as just a ranch vehicle. The story is that I'd always wanted a Jeep, but never quite got round to it. I was driving along one day and passed by a ranch, and there was this Jeep standing in the yard. And as I went past, I thought, well, that's just the sort of Jeep which I'd like to have. Continued on down the road, and then 2 or 3 miles later, I said to myself, well, okay, instead of just driving past and wishing, why not do something? So I stopped the car, turned around, went back, looked at the Jeep. It looked in reasonable condition. There was nobody in the house. The owner was away at work. So I just took a sheet out of my notebook and wrote a message saying, was passing by, saw this Jeep, wondered if you want to sell, here's my phone number. Put it on the steering wheel and thought, well, nothing's going to come of it. Sure enough, that evening the guy called up and says, you know what, I was thinking of selling, so how about it? Anyway, it turned out that it was just a ranch vehicle. It was in really poor shape. You can imagine blue and yellow color, fat balloon tires on rusting chrome wheels. As it turned out later, a broken rear axle, both windshield glasses broken, and so on. It was just
the usual
thing.
For a barn find,
but the body was in reasonable shape and not too much rust. So I thought, okay, well that's a good idea. So we looked around for gradual restoration. First thing, of course, was to find the axle, and an axle would have cost, I don't know, $500 or $600. And luckily, in the small ads in the local paper, I found an ad for a Jeep, which turned out to be 3/4 of a Jeep. I mean, it was complete at the front, but the rear end had all been shaved off flat. And so I bought that for $600. So I got my rear axle for the price, and then complete
bunch of parts,
engine, transmission, gearbox, and what have you. And so a bit at a time, we then took that apart, and eventually we took the whole thing down to the frame and put the new parts on. And so there it is. It's not immaculately restored, but it's like we call motor pool ready. Right?
Yeah,
no pretension.
There's nothing wrong with that. We saved it from an unknown future. And,
well, that's for sure, yes.
All of us enthusiasts are indebted to you for saving one, and We are happy to see you here.
Well, thank you. Just a little bit of history.
Now, what about yourself? Just a few words.
I was in scientific research, and for much of my life I was in industry research. Worked for a number of companies, starting off in Britain, as you might have guessed, and then worked in Belgium for a short while. Worked in Switzerland for 12 years, then back to England, and then for a short while in Paris. And then in 1988 came over here and I moved to Berkeley, and I moved out of industrial research and I became a professor at Berkeley.
Well, that's a great adventure that you went on.
It was indeed, yes.
Yes, and so here we are, all together in one place, enjoying our hobby, and
not half.
Really glad to have you with us.
Well, thank you.
All right. Well, it was good seeing you again, George.
My pleasure.
You take care.
Thank you.
Well, I guess that wraps it up for the 2018 MVCC Spring Meet. Did you have a good time, Damon?
I sure did. It was a week of fun and get away from the usual routine.
Yep.
And we got to see some of our old friends and a lot of Jeeps. And as you saw, we wanted to interview a few folks so you could get a little more detail about what they have and what they did.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting Jeeps around, and we figured we'd highlight them and make Jeep talk a little more about talking about Jeeps for a change.
Yeah. And another thing of note is this venue that we're at. This is the last year.
Yep.
So, but we'll see you again at the next meet in the fall, and that will be back at our old standby, which is Tower Park in Central Valley, California.
Yep.
And we'll be doing some more interviews and maybe chatting with some folks that you haven't met yet. So we hope you will tune in.
Yep. And for Damon and I and Jeep Talk, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys down the road.
That's for sure.